That spring when life was very hard and I was at war with my lot and simply could not see where there was to get to. I seemed to cry most on escalators at train stations. Going down them was fine, but there was something about standing still and being carried upwards that did it. Hi, I'm Ridhima. Welcome to the Old Trunk. You know that feeling when you read a book and it hits you in the chest? It's like you didn't even need it, but there it is, quietly rearranging your thoughts. That was me with Things I Don't Want to Know by Deborah Levy. And today we're going to talk about why this book is brilliant, why it deserves a permanent spot on your bookshelf, and why, if you haven't read it yet, you should absolutely read it. So grab a cup of tea or coffee or whatever fancies you and let's dive in. This isn't your linear memoir. It moves fluidly between past and present, between deeply personal memories and sharp cultural observations. And it does it all with Levy's signature poetic and crystalline prose. Every sentence is so deliberate, so precise, and yet it feels effortless. You just want to underline everything. It's more like a meditation on writing, on being a woman, on the weight of history and the small, sharp moments that shape us. It's the first book in the Living Autobiography series, and it was written as a response to George Orwell's 1964 essay, Why I Write. Divided into 4 sections and mirroring Orwell's reasons for writing: sheer egoism, aesthetic enthusiasm, historical impulse, and political purpose. Levy takes us on a journey through her childhood in apartheid South Africa, her teenage years in exile, and her life as a struggling writer in London. Okay, now we have to talk about Levy's writing. It's chef's kiss. So sparse, so precise, but packed with meaning. She doesn't waste words, and somehow even her shortest sentences carry so much weight. She's the kind of writer who can describe something completely ordinary and make it profound. She doesn't just tell you things, she makes you feel them. There's a kind of quiet power in her sentences which land with this incredible weight. It's like she's peeling back the layers of everyday life and showing you what's underneath. She perfectly captures the feeling of struggle, of being a woman, of being a writer, of trying to carve out a space for yourself in a world that constantly tries to push you back. She writes, "To become a writer, I had to learn to interrupt, to speak up, to speak a little louder, and then to just speak in my own voice, which is not loud at all." That tension between wanting to be heard and the difficulty of finding your voice is something so many of us can relate to. There's this one instance where she becomes so obsessed with change that staring at a poster of the human skeletal system in her bathroom which she misreads as the societal system, she realizes that society is taking her to places she does not want to go, as a woman in general, or as a mother in particular. She quotes Adrian Rich: "No woman is really an insider in the institutions fathered by masculine consciousness." She writes that motherhood was an institution fathered by masculine consciousness. This male consciousness was male unconsciousness. It needed its female partners, who were also mothers, to stamp on her own desires and attend to his desires, and then to everyone else's desires. We had a go at cancelling our own desires and found we had a talent for it. And we put a lot of our life's energy into creating a home for our children and for our men. It probably means she is refusing to be passive and wants to do something else with her life. And that's the thing about Levy. She's not just writing about herself, she's writing about all of us, about the quiet battles we fight every day. One of my favorite things about this book is how Levy weaves in the personal with the political. She doesn't just talk about feminism, exile, and power in some abstract way. She makes it felt through her own experiences. Take her childhood, where she doesn't just talk about apartheid South Africa as a backdrop. She makes you feel what it was like to be a child in that environment, to sense injustice before you even had the words for it. She describes her father being imprisoned for resisting the regime and the weight of that silence in their household. For the 5 years her father was incarcerated, Levy was expected to be brave. Knowing she was not to mention his whereabouts, she made up stories about his being in England. Mostly, though, she did not talk. It was an effort to get any words out of her. The volume of her voice had somehow been turned down. At school, her nonsense, not speaking audibly, and her refusal to fill her notebooks as directed inflamed her Afrikaner teacher, who evidently perceived the child's acts of some kind of political resistance. The woman sent the girl to the headmaster's office, where she was slapped ostensibly for her failure to comply, but actually for being the Jewish daughter of a political prisoner, a man who dared to challenge the racist status quo. That's such a heavy, heartbreaking truth, especially coming from the perspective of a child who is just beginning to understand the power structures around her. It speaks to the way children absorb things, not through facts, but through atmosphere, through whispers, through the way adults carry themselves. She provides a window into her teenage life in exile, in England with no friends, where she is trying to write. Exile is not just about being banished from a country. It is about being ejected from a version of yourself that you can no longer access. It's not just about geography. It's about identity, about losing parts of yourself when you're forced to start over, as her family moved to the UK, a few months after her father was released. And then her parents separated sometime after, as the love between them had gone wrong in England. She says her father's clothes were still in the cupboard: jackets, shoes, a hanger full of ties. But his books had disappeared from the shelves. The worst reminder of all was that her father had left his forlorn shaving brush and the box of migraine tablets in the bathroom cabinet. That line broke my heart. I don't know, I just felt, as a child, she must have felt he left everything that could be replaced. And that feeling for a child is heartbreaking. And I had a tear in my eye when I read this. And trying to cope with her parents' separation, she writes, writing made me feel wiser than I was. Sorry, she writes, writing made me feel wiser than I actually was. Wise and sad. That was what I thought writers should be. I was sad anyway, much sadder than the sentences I wrote. I was a sad girl impersonating a sad girl. Writing led her to questioning, and she questions her homeland. She writes, I had so many questions to ask the world from my bedroom in West Finchley. About the country I was born in. How do people become cruel and depraved? If you torture someone, are you mad or are you normal? If a white man sets his dog on a black child and everyone says that's okay, if the neighbors and the police and the judges say, that's fine by me, is life worth living? What about the people who don't think it's okay? Are there enough of them in the world? These lines shook me to the core of my bones. As we see injustices in the same vein so rampant around us. And this connects to one of the book's biggest themes, how we learn to navigate power structures from a young age. Whether it's the political system we're born into, the gender roles we're expected to perform, or even the unspoken rules within our families. Levy unpacks all of it in a way that feels deeply personal. And then there's the way she writes about gender. She doesn't just talk about sexism in an abstract way. She shows how it operates in everyday life. She writes, like everything that involves love, our children made us happy beyond measure and unhappy too, but never as miserable as the 21st century neo-patriarchy made us feel. It required us to be passive but ambitious, maternal but erotically energetic, self-sacrificing but fulfilled. We were to be strong modern women while being subjected to all kinds of humiliations, both economic and domestic. If we felt guilty about everything most of the time, we were not sure what it was we had done, what we had actually done wrong. Wow, I mean, wow. That line hits home on so many levels because we see women in our lives going through this all the time. Also, what I really appreciate is the way she never over explains. She trusts the reader. She gives you these snapshots, these moments, and lets you sit with them. She doesn't spoon feed you conclusions. Instead, she invites you to make connections, to feel the weight of her experiences in a way that lingers long after you finish the book. In an effort to come to terms with what was happening inside, Levy removed herself from the domestic scene, traveling to an out of the way pension in Palma, Mallorca, where subversive French author George Sand once stayed with Chopin, a place where she'd found solace in the past. In the humble little hotel run by Maria, a woman who'd managed to avoid the traditional roles of wife and mother, Levy could rest, reflect, and take stock. She ruminates on old journals, losing herself in a way only writers can. Looping through times and places, she explores her childhood, followed by a lonely, displaced teenagehood, and finally her place as a woman, ergo a wife and mother. Her own desires unclear, she seeks to escape these many confining roles. She spent a number of years trying to be a talented mother while trying to be a writer at the same time, and experienced huge frustration in both domains, concluding, "The world loved the delusion of the mother more than it loved the mother." She goes on to say, "Perhaps when Orwell described sheer egoism as a necessary quality for a writer, he was not thinking about the sheer egoism of a female writer. Even the most arrogant female writer has to work overtime to build an ego that is robust enough to get her through January, never mind all the way to December." That line gave me chills. It says everything about gender, about emotional labor, about the invisibility of struggle without having to over explain. She writes, "To speak up is not about speaking louder. It is about feeling entitled to voice a wish." This book is no academic thesis. It's not a rageful account of a woman who is shouting for her own power. It's a far more subtle yet equally forceful articulation of someone's voice put into words, as if fighting years of internalized patriarchal ideas that refuse to let it find itself. And that's part of what makes Things I Don't Want to Know such a brave book. Because Levy breaks those silences. She forces herself to look at the things she'd rather turn away from. She forces us to look at them too. This is one of those books that doesn't just tell a story, it makes you reflect on your own life. There were so many moments where I had to put the book down and just think about what it means to be a woman, about the stories we tell ourselves, about the things we push aside because they're too painful or too complicated. It's about all those uncomfortable truths we try to ignore. The ones about power, about gender, about how the world works. I finished this book and I just sat there. It's one of those books that changes the way you see things, not because it gives you answers, but because it helps you ask better questions. Levy writes about being a woman, a writer, an exile, about power, language, and the things we don't want to know but must face. And she does it all in a way that feels raw, poetic, and deeply intelligent. If you're a writer or a creative person, you'll find so much inspiration in Levy's reflections on what it means to write, to shape your own narrative. If you love introspective, beautifully written books that blend memoir with philosophy, this is for you. If you've ever felt like an outsider, whether it's because of your politics, your identity, or just the way your mind works, this book will speak to you. If you love books that explore why we write, why words matter, and how personal history shapes creativity, this is for you. And honestly, even if you don't read memoirs, it's for anyone who's ever felt like they didn't quite fit, for anyone who's wrestled with their past, for anyone who's tried to carve out a space for themselves in a world that doesn't always make room, which, let's be real, it's most of us. Things I Don't Want to Know is a quiet masterpiece. It's sharp, poetic, deeply moving. It's a book about writing, but also a book about everything that makes writing necessary: history, politics, gender, memory. And one of those books that once you've read, you'll find yourself coming back to again and again. If you haven't read it yet, I cannot recommend it anymore. And if you have read it, tell me in the comments, what did you think? What quote stood out to you the most? That's it. That's all I wanted to say about this book. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe because that really helps my channel grow. And don't forget to press the bell icon so that you are notified of whenever I upload a new video. And if you have any recommendations for books in a similar vein, do leave them in the comments. I'm always looking for my next great read. Until then, stay happy. Thanks for watching. Lots of love. Bye bye.